The premiere of Alien Earth has hidden details that make me rethink the entire Alien franchise, going all the way back to the very first Alien. Welcome back, ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy, and this is all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things you might have missed in the premiere of Alien Earth. Now, not only are we going to break down this episode, but we also recovered this case from the crash site of the USS Mazzio, and it contains a flash drive that gives us a huge clue as to how these aliens actually escaped the crash. Now, we're going to break down episodes 1 and 2, but don't worry, we are going to be spoiler-free. So, if you've only watched episode 1, we have chapter mark episode 2 below. Now, let's get started. Now, despite word that the writer and director Noah Hawley was going to completely ignore the franchise's rich lore, these first 2 episodes play out like an absolute love letter to the classic films, while also expanding the world in ways that should give fans more than enough to sink their teeth into. And later I'll tell you about some fun new Alien parody shirts that we have at our merch store. Hawley's homage to all things Alien begins with the return of the classic green text, just like Mother used to write.
Person, is that supposed to be a your mom joke?
No, Doug, that wasn't a joke. I would never joke about your mom. Mother, or MUTHUR 6000, is the name of the onboard computer system on board the Nostromo, the iconic ship from the first movie. And it's the same computer they use here on the Mazzio. They use text-based input because that's what people in the 80s thought the future would look like. Here, however, Hawley uses it intentionally to create a unique retro-futuristic aesthetic, something that he stressed was a priority in recreating when he initially took on the series. Here, we see it used to reintroduce the audience to the synthetics, which have always been a huge part of the series ever since the first movie. They're robots made to look human, juicy liquid-filled insides and all, and they're often used in the series as a reflection of or commentary on their human co-stars. Alien Earth expands the concept further, introducing cyborgs and hybrids who combine the synthetic technology with living human beings in their own unique way. It creates an unnatural combination of inorganic and organic life that seems to be a recurring theme of this series.
Hey, yeah, how you doing after that big month? You checking in? You doing okay?
Dude, not bad. I mean, you guys know July was one of our busiest months ever, with Superman and the Fantastic Four both coming out a couple weeks apart. And stressful times like that used to really get to me, and I would rely on my bad oral fixation habits. Like for me, it's squishing one eye really hard, or licking my lips, or biting my tongue. So instead, I replace my facial tics with Fume. They're the sponsor of this video. Now, I'm sure you guys have your own bad habits that you would like to quit, especially in social situations when you feel anxious or just bored. For me, Fume has been a game changer. Fume does not use smoke or vapor, just natural flavored air that gives you something to reach for without the chemicals. Studies have shown that quitting a bad habit cold turkey is actually really bad for you. So I like having something to reach for when I feel that urge. This is a great alternative to those harmful habits. Guys, this is an award-winning flavored air device that does not use combustion, and it's not even electronic. You can use it anywhere. No smoke, no vapor, no chemicals, just natural flavored air. See, it has these plant-based cores that just taste great. In fact, they just introduced mango, my new favorite flavor. It's bolder than past flavors I've tried, and I recommend it if you want to switch things up. These are non-toxic flavors and a guilt-free alternative with natural ingredients. But you guys know, I also love this magnetic, fidget-friendly design that makes this incredibly satisfying sound. Guys, more than 500,000 people have already added Fume to their daily routine, and I totally get why. It's simple, satisfying, and doesn't come with any of the downsides of your old bad habits. And right now, if you order the Journey Pack using my code ScreenCrush, you will get a free Fume topper. It's this rubber piece on the end, so you can chew on the end of it. It's great for oral fixation anxiety. So if you've been thinking about changing your habits, I think Fume is the perfect first step. Go to tryfume.com/ScreenCrush or scan the QR code on screen right now to grab yours today. Now, back to what I was saying. Now, the show intro is almost directly pulled from the opening of the original 1979 film, down to the color scheme, with the title slowly fading into view in disjointed segments. Ridley Scott intended to create a feeling of unsettling fragmentation with his iconic intro, but Hawley takes that one step further by using split-second single-frame jump scares throughout the episode. Now, we get the first taste of that in the intro when they flash images of Xenomorphs over a close-up shot of the back of a drone's head, followed by a shot of the USCSS Maginot passing Saturn. Now, the ship takes its name from André Maginot, a French politician famous for creating the Maginot Line. Now, this was a string of forts that were meant to stop the Nazis from invading, but they still managed to do so anyway. Ever since, the Maginot Line has been a metaphor for anything super expensive that only offers a false sense of security, which is a fitting name for a research vessel that doesn't seem to have a very good handle on its dangerous cargo. Everything on board the Maginot looks like it was taken straight out of the original film. The hibernation pods are exactly the same as the ones the Nostromo used. Even the crew crew themselves act like they're straight out of the late 70s. Everything from the haircuts to the way they talk feels like this is just one big deleted scene from Ridley Scott's original. We see crew members smoking and dipping tobacco, even the ship's doctor. The crew members even seem to echo the original Nostromo crew. Not only does one member look remarkably like Captain Dallas, but the engineer has an orange cat just like Samuel the engineer from the Nostromo did. At the table, we see they're sipping Aspen beer, which is the iconic fake beer that Ridley Scott created for the first movie. He chose to make an original beer to not only avoid the irony of product placement in a movie so blatantly critical of capitalism, but also because he intentionally wanted to include a beer that was brewed by Wayland-Yutani.
Well, that sounds pretty important.
Well, of course, Doug, Wayland-Yutani are bigger and badder than the Xenomorphs themselves. They're your cliche evil corporation known for prioritizing profit over people, and they're one of the 5 companies that control what's left of Earth. Scott wanted to use the beer as a way to show just how pervasive the company is in their lives and how much control they have over every aspect of it. But the commercial success of the franchise clearly canceled out its anti-capitalist messaging, and eventually they brewed the beer into a reality as a promotional campaign for Alien Romulus. We also see the iconic drinking bird, which has become something of a symbol for the franchise as a whole. It's a small bird figurine that bobs for water using basic thermodynamics that Scott added to give the set some charm, and it's been included in nearly everything Alien related ever since. In fact, it was so iconic that it was featured on the cover of Becoming Alien, a novel by Sarah Welsh Larson detailing the aesthetics of the franchise. You could also say that the bird itself is programmed to only do what it does, and the franchise seems to have that same critique on humanity, on robots, and of course on the Xenomorphs. All of us are simply following our programming.
It's drinking the water!
We also learn about the current state of the 22nd century Earth as one of the engineers explains the corporate chain of command to one of the younger crewmates.
I wasn't paying attention. Who are the corporations?
Well, we know that one of them is Dynamic, who...
And they control North and South America.
On the moon, right?
No, that's Dynamic.
Referencing the Luna Base, a colony created by Earth in 2094 to survive a deadly pandemic. It's a deep cut since it was only ever introduced in the comics and novels. However, the moon looks pretty bare when we pass by it later on in the episode, so maybe the colony is not fully developed. The other 2 companies are not mentioned directly, but we know from interviews around the film's promotion that the other 2 are named Lynch and Threshold, but we don't know much more than that. We're also teased with some inter-crew drama when we were introduced to Mr. Tank, who's evidently been extra creepy during their trip and staring at this woman in cryostasis. It's a major red herring and clearly meant to set viewers up to think that he is an evil synthetic like Ash in the first movie. But the real mole is Morrow, the cyborg who seems to be there to keep everyone in check. Now, before the crew finally heads off to cryostasis, we see some final shots of our zoologist looking over her captured specimens, including the nightmare-inducing space ticks that we see later in the episode. We also see some facehuggers and a beetle-like creature, as well as this T. Ocelus. And you guys know how much we love the Alien franchise, and that is why we designed these brand new Alien parody shirts at our merch store. We have the Xenomorph leaping out of your chest with sunglasses, and then we have him in a little barbershop quartet hat, you know, like this.
Hello, my baby. Hello, my honey. Hello, my ragtime gal.
Shopping our merch store is the best way to directly support our channel, and if you like these shirts, you can find them linked below. So we see Hawley use flash jump scare shots from the crew's future, allowing us to understand pieces of what happened without having to essentially recreate the entire first movie. The flickering shots show the Xenomorph escaping before taking out Mr. Tank from above, just like Samuel the engineer aboard the Nostromo. And then we find our way to the Neverland Research Center, which is where we first see Prodigy's Peter Pan metaphors come into play. Now, the island is owned by Boy Cavalier, the CEO of Prodigy Corps that we first heard about during the crew's meal aboard the Mazzio. He likes to think of himself as Peter Pan, whisking these sick kids away from their tragic fate and granting them eternal life as mortal children in Neverland. But in reality, he's an idealistic technocrat with an ego. This is when we meet Marcy, who is set to become the first human hybrid after discovering that she's fatally ill, which is an entirely new concept of this franchise. Now, we've had synthetics since the first film, but they were always fully artificial and lacked any emotions. However, a hybrid creates a blending of both organic and inorganic in a way that feels eerily reminiscent of the replicants from Blade Runner, who were essentially biogenetically engineered superhumans made from organic material. Now, since Ridley Scott created both films, fans have theorized for decades that the films might exist within the same universe, and directors have sprinkled Easter eggs throughout the films to suggest that to be the case. There was the extra feature on the 20th anniversary DVD of Alien, which included files of all the crew and specifically mentions Dallas performing duties for the Tyrell Corporation, the very same corporation corporation responsible for making the replicants. And then there was the Blu-ray release of Prometheus, which included a booklet containing a diary excerpt from Peter Wayland reflecting on his experiences with his mentor, Dr. Eldon Tyrell. The similarities between the hybrids and the replicants certainly aren't the only Blade Runner influences that we see in these two episodes. It's a fitting influence, though, given that both films question what it really means to be human, and we see that as Marcy debates with Krish on whether or not to kill the trapped Scorpion. The use of the Scorpion is a clear reference to the design of the facehugger, but it also gives Krish a chance to talk about their role in the natural world. When Marcy asks if he's going to kill it, he responds with,
"What do you think we should do with it?"
It's almost as if he's testing to see if she has empathy for another living creature, something he sees as inherently human. And we continue to see him test her like this after her transition later in the episode. As she's being escorted to the lab, the two pass by a man who seems to be spraying a wall with what looks like water vapor, which may explain why everything in this franchise is just always dripping wet. And that's when Boyd Collier makes his formal introduction to Marcy, positioning her as some kind of pioneer for the journey, finishing with,
"Do you want to see a magic trick?"
Something we hear Wendy later repeat when inducting each new member of the Lost Boys. The screen above them starts playing Disney's classic animated rendition of Peter Pan, which is a pretty heavy-handed metaphor for the process of immortalizing children in a body that never ages. However, the fact that they're given a flower to hold like a corpse at a funeral feels like a reference to a popular dark fan theory from Reddit that suggests that Peter Pan isn't a hero, but rather an evil spirit that kills children in their sleep, stealing their immortal souls away and forcing them into his immortal army. After Marcy fully embraces the Peter Pan metaphor by naming her new body Wendy, she leaps into her new body. We learn that her human emotions have been replaced by artificial ones to help her cope with the transition. This gives her the strange childlike demeanor that still seems devoid of emotion. The mix of childlike innocence and a newfound adult body also parallels what we see Ripley go through in Alien Resurrection. Now, that movie is a mess of complicated details, but they essentially bring back Ripley's clone, and when they do, they're surprised at how fast she's able to learn, and they're shocked to find that she has
a completely adult capacity.
As Krish and Dr. Sylvia talk to Wendy about her progress, it's clear that both doctors represent the polarizing side of Wendy's inner conflict. This becomes the most obvious when Dr. Sylvia suggests increasing her emotions to ease her transition, which is when we hear Krish say,
"She's not human anymore. Why are we pretending she is?"
Clearly, Krish wants Wendy to realize her full potential as a synthetic and embrace it, while Dr. Sylvia wants her to retain as much of her humanity as possible. The argument between them essentially narrates the internal conflict that Wendy is having, even if her new artificial emotions aren't letting her show it, which eventually leads her to ask,
"What am I?"
Whatever you want to be.
Yet again, he offers her a choice. Meanwhile, Boyd Cavalier is eavesdropping on the conversation through Wendy's eyes, showing how converting into a hybrid essentially forfeits all rights to privacy. Behind him are some synthetic clone faces, as well as a giant vat of white synthetic blood, and a synthetic spinal cord, which is pretty recognizable given how many of them we have seen ripped in half. Before introducing Wendy to the future Lost Boys, Dr. Sylvia gives her a stuffed walrus. Now typically, walruses symbolize gentleness, strength, and social connection, which we see plenty of in Wendy, but more importantly, it becomes a symbol of her finding a home in Neverland. Now, when we see Wendy meet the new children, they do so in an artificial garden, which is an apt place to discuss the process that they're about to go through, since, after all, they are surrounded by something artificially created to sustain organic life, just like the process of transitioning into a hybrid. We also get some insight into why they're using kids for this process when she says,
"Grown-up minds are too stiff, but our minds, kid minds, we fit just right."
And then we see the Lost Boys converted into their new synthetic bodies one by one in a single, beautiful, continuous shot, before hearing Boyd Cavalier reading Peter Pan to the kids.
It is the nightly custom of every good mother to rummage in their minds and put things straight.
Motherhood is a common theme within the Alien franchise. Not only are the Xenomorphs a brutal manifestation of forced motherhood, but the very idea of motherhood was a core aspect of all of Ripley's stories from the very first Alien film all the way to Alien Resurrection. As we said before, Mother is also the name of the computer system that controls the Yutani ships, and it would be no surprise if Prodigy had a similar system too. So, hearing Boyd read this specific line could be a subtle hint that Prodigy is running late-night updates to their programming to rewrite their thoughts while they sleep. And all of the imagery that follows seems to confirm that they are certainly hiding something. We see Wendy's old body zipped up in a body bag, followed by a statue of three wise monkeys, see no evil, hear no evil, and speak no evil, which typically symbolize intentionally ignoring the wrongdoings of others. As our perspective shifts back to the Mazzio, the camera travels through the canals of the ship, and once again flashing split-second jump scares of the scenes that happened along the way to fill us in on what happened to this crew. Now, the way the scenes are shot even mirrors scenes scenes that we saw in Alien 3, where the camera travels through the halls from the perspective of the Xenomorph. But honestly, we're lucky that FX has a bit better production value than they did. We see shots of each creature escaping, rampaging through the ship and leaving no one alive, except for Morrow and one other unlucky crew member who gets locked out after he goes full Ulysses Claw and fuses the door to the control room shut. His dedication to keeping the specimen alive and contained yet again echoes Ash's role in the first film, who had a similar directive to ensure the survival of the specimen by any means necessary. Now, as the ship clips the space station in space, the collision is completely silent, since there's no air in space for sound to travel through, which is not only more scientifically accurate than the loud space explosions we see in Star Wars, but it's also a reference to the iconic tagline used to promote the original movie: "In space, no one can hear you scream." However, before the Mazzio makes its landing, Wendy's brother Joe is introduced to her as she watches him with her collection of stuffies.
But person, why is she obsessed with her brother if she no longer has any feelings?
Well, she still has artificial feelings, but more importantly, it's the way the series shows her desire to be human on an emotional level. Plus, it fits in perfectly with what we've seen in the franchise thus far. Both Aliens and Resurrection had strong motherhood themes that connected Ripley to the Xenomorphs themselves in some pretty intimate and odd ways. And while Hawley has specifically stated that this is not a Ripley story, Wendy is clearly the Ripley of this story. We also know from both of those films as well that there are really two kinds of synthetics. Ones with empathy and a genuine desire to be human, like Bishop in Aliens or Annalee in Resurrection, and there's also the synthetics who think that they're superior to humans, like Krish. She says,
His name is Joe. Joe DiMaggio, like the baseball player.
referencing the famous 1941 baseball player, which is a massive callback for a supposed child who is living in the 22nd century. But later on, we find out that baseball was very important to their father, so it explains this niche reference. We can tell her affection for walruses has certainly grown, since she now has a drawing of a walrus on her wall and a much larger walrus stuffy on her bed. She's also finding new abilities with her synthetic body, as she's able to hack into video interfaces so she can continue watching her brother as he moves throughout the city. He's working as a medic for the Marines, and as he makes his way through New Siam, we can see that this future has a massive wealth divide. Nearly all of the working class people live in abject poverty and clearly don't benefit from any of the future's technological innovations. In fact, Joe looks like he's living in a situation worse off than most people are today. Not only does all the technology in the home look like it's literally from the 80s, but he's having to live at a group home with what seems like multiple other families. This just goes to show how these massive corporations have failed society on a larger level. Even if the citizens wanted a different life, it's completely inaccessible to them. He doesn't even have a TV, so he shares his projector with some kids as he watches Ice Age 4 Continental Drift, something that he clearly watched many times as a child with his sister. This gives us at least a reference in this movie to something that's actually from the 21st century, but to them, it must have felt like a classic film. Ice Age 4, like all the Ice Age movies, is about the process of accepting change and being comfortable in the new place that you've settled in afterwards, which is a fitting theme for Wendy to latch onto during such unstable times. And things get even more unstable as the Mazzio finally makes contact with Earth. Joe gets a first-hand view of the entire incident while he's catching a workout atop a rooftop gym. Now, just before the ship crashes, we see a ripple effect through the puddles, a reference to the water cup from Jurassic Park that rippled as the T-Rex drew near. As Prodigy's private military responds to the crash, we get a sneak peek at their uniforms, which take clear inspiration from the Colonial Marines that we've seen in James Cameron's Aliens and several different video games. The vehicles themselves seem inspired by the same M577 armored personnel carriers that we see Ripley and the crew rolling around in, except with much brighter colors. Now, when they get to the crash site, the engines are still burning, which makes sense since they would have been damaged in the crash, but it also causes the ship to surge forward as the unstable debris in front of it shifts, as we see later. After several jump scares and a close call with the doggo, they finally find the ship with a gaping hole in its side, inviting them in. Now, as they step into the ship, one of the crewmates asks,
Wayland-Yutani. I used to collect the cards when I was a kid.
Likely a reference to the alien trading cards that were distributed in the early 1980s. When Wendy catches word of what's going on, she immediately wants to jump into action and convinces Boy Cavalier to let her and the Lost Boys go on the reconnaissance mission. Now, when she asks, he responds with,
Look at her face. Her body language. I mean, if I didn't know better, I'd say she was human.
I am human.
which continues to expose her internal struggle to not only retain her humanity, but also to prove to everyone at Prodigy that she is still a human being. Now, when she goes back to her room, she grabs the stuffed walrus and clips it to the front of her belt loop.
Like a lava bear?
A what?
You know, like the plush toy monster elves that have become a viral sensation. The ones that people wear on the front of their belt or as a bag or as a fashion statement, a status symbol.
Yeah. lot like that. How do you even know that?
Yeah, I'm actually in a pretty intense legal battle with him over identity theft. My culture is not a costume.
Fair enough, but the walrus isn't the only thing that she grabs. She also rips the blade from an old school paper cutter, which is an odd choice.
Free will, right?
In a world where everyone else she's surrounded by has high-tech weaponry and guns, she's literally bringing a knife to a gunfight. However, once again, this reinforces the Peter Pan motif, since Peter famously defended himself against Captain Hook's sword with nothing but a knife. They head off into a military aircraft that seems to take some inspiration from the UD-4 Cheyenne dropships from James Cameron's Aliens, but it also bears a striking resemblance to the Yacha spaceships that we see in Predator. Obviously, it's not a Yacha ship, but the AVP series did establish that Wayland-Yutani, specifically Yutani, ended up with their hands on Yacha tech, which may have inspired the design of these ships. And a crossover also wouldn't be completely out of left field, given that Wayland-Yutani synthetic in the Predator Badlands trailer, which drops later this year. In fact, we even hear this Predator-like sound while the rescue crew members are searching for survivors amongst the Mazzio's wreckage. Having the soldier pair up in squads of 2 to 3 feels reminiscent of the Aliens Colonial Marines, which is a co-op game that you could play with a minimum of 2 players exploring similar situations. After the Marines get ambushed by our unkillable cyborg, he changes them to one of the pipes in the lab, and as he leaves, one of them asks,
You can't leave us like this. I'm not your brother.
So this poses Morrow as the inverse of Wendy. Even though he's technically more human than her, he is clearly trying to suppress that side of himself, pulling him even closer to the synthetic villain stereotype that the series is known for. The show also pays tribute to the original films by subtly hiding the Xenomorph in the background, moving in the final seconds of the shot as Joe examines the bodies that never made it out of stasis. The blood trail leading from the chamber confirms that it was the chestburster that matured into the Xenomorph drone, since we see the blood trails from the space ticks leave a large straight smudge instead of the smaller zigzag pattern that we see. Speaking of which, after the space ticks suck the Prodigy guards dry, we end on an ominous note, with Krish pushing Wendy once again to abandon her humanity and embrace her superiority as a synthetic.
Used to be food, you know. Then your brains grew. You built tools and used them to conquer nature. You stopped being food.
Now there seems to be this subtle sense of superiority that pure synthetics have amongst themselves, that we have seen ever since the very first film with Ash, and then again with David in the prequels, and Krish seems to be no different. The episode closes out with the song Mob Rule by Black Sabbath. Now the song is not only timely, given the recent passing of Ozzy Osbourne, but it also has a deeper meaning. The chorus is, "If you listen to fools, the mob rules," which is pretty apt messaging for what we just saw. Everyone in the show is messing with powers they don't understand. The Mazzio crew doesn't understand the danger of the cargo they're holding. Boy Cavalier and all the researchers in Neverland are exploring new technology that they don't understand. And they're even pushing the limits of what their tech can do. The Xenomorph is essentially a cosmic condemnation of this kind of arrogance, just like the song, which is some powerful context to carry on to the next episode. Now, like I said, we actually recovered this Pelican case from the crash site.
Person.
Sorry, Doug recovered this case from the crash site. Good boy, high five. Now, inside of this thing, you will not believe what we found. Yes, there is a hat, part of the uniform from the USS Maginot. We have a mug from the USS Maginot. We have a dog tag. Actually, Doug, do you want the Wayland-Yutani dog tag?
Yeah, sure, man, whatever, I'll have that.
A deck of cards for playing gin rummy, and most importantly, the real gem is this flash drive that has exclusive footage from the Maginot before the aliens broke loose. So we're going to break this footage down and talk about the hidden clue that is buried in this flash drive. So we start with Dr. Rahim talking to his cat, the same cat we see in the opening of the episode. And of course, this is a callback to Jonesy from Aliens. Now Rahim puts a camera on the cat's collar, so everything in this footage was actually recorded from the cat's point of view. Now the green font that we see on the screen and the monitors is of course from Alien and Aliens, telling us that this footage was recovered by Prodigy and that access is restricted. So this tells us that Wayland-Yutani does not recover everything on this ship, if they're even able to recover any of it at all. Now as the cat walks around, we see this X-ray that looks like an amplified view of the tick alien that attacked the Marines. Here in Corridor C, we see face huggers in the background, and in the reflection of this monitor, we see the console lights from the security desk that we see in the opening shots of episode 1. And then the cat jumps on the keyboard, accidentally bringing up the mission protocol. I actually would have loved it if the cat would have been the one to set the monsters loose, but no such luck. Instead, the message reads that the mission priority is safe acquisition and return of the organisms for analysis, and no other objectives matter. And this is just like in Alien, when the mission to recover new life superseded the Nostromo's trucking route. And this is also what Morrow explains in the first episode.
The specimens are the mission.
period.
And then we see the file for the ovomouth, meaning the face hugger, which lays eggs in your mouth. And we also see the reassuring message that the organism is contained, but the risk is high. In file number 2, crew members are talking about what they miss the most. And one of them points out, casually,
the kids are older than me now.
Now, this is because of the cryosleep slowing aging, but also it's a product of faster than light travel. You see, the closer an object moves to the speed of light, the slower it experiences time. So if you did travel close to the speed of light and return to Earth, everybody you knew would have aged at a different rate than you. Now, also, I don't blame them for missing whiskey if all they have to drink is the beer made by Wayland-Yutani. And when he says the planet he would live on, he says,
Arcturus, maybe.
And Arcturus is a deep cut to this franchise. It is the home of the first humanoid alien race that humans ever encountered, which might be why he responds,
Gross.
Because the Arcturians were not attractive aliens. Now, this planet was first mentioned in the Sega game, Alien Isolation, and later in the novel, Alien Invasion, but we actually get to see the Arcturians in the Alien role-playing game. Now, file number 4 is set in the zoo lab, and in this case, zoo would be short for zoological, and not a zoo where you get to go see the bears.
Jeez.
I told you, buddy, next Saturday we're gonna go, I promise. Now, this tank looks like it contains one of the 3 unnamed creatures on this ship. To me, this looks like the flying creature that we see crawling here. Now, Karen Aldridge plays this zoologist who loves this kitty.
Hey, kitty, kitty.
In the actual episode, her studying the organism is intercut with how she dies. And the second tank here looks like the bottom of the egg chamber, complete with the Wayland-Yutani logo. Now, in this short clip, the doctor and the zoologist are playing gent, and they ask,
Flora or fauna? I'm not sure, maybe both.
and this is maybe referring to this alien in episode 2.
It looks like a plant.
In file number 5, the cat wanders onto the bridge, and then the cryo chamber, and finally focuses on Morrow's pod. And this is where we get the big clue about what went down. So the cat is spooked, and then we see these alarms cascading down the hallway. And those alarms might look familiar because they are the self-destruct alarms that we saw in Alien. So it looks like the aliens didn't escape first. I think there was an actual mechanical failure on the ship that caused a fire that then led to the aliens getting loose. And this is also implying that this automatically set in a self-destruct sequence, but then Morrow's pod was activated, he woke up and prevented the ship from self-destructing. Like we see in this first episode, he values the mission above all else.
Okay, but what happened to the kitty? Is it okay?
I'm sure it's fine. The second episode opens just like the first, with the title fading into fragments and dashes just like the 1979 film. But this time, instead of distant shots of the Mazzio, we get a small recap of the previous episode, with some flashes of the Xenomorph spliced in between. Now, throughout the entire episode, we see not so subtle signs of a Xenomorph stalking Joe, blending into the background of dark corners of the ship or hiding in the loose cables of the ship, showing just how much the Xenomorph's design actually works as great natural camouflage. We saw this in the original 1979 film, where the Xenomorph was able to hide itself in the escape pod with Ripley, but many of the shots here seem to reference how James Cameron pulled off similar shots in Aliens, hiding them in plain sight until the perfect moment. Eventually, they discover the zoologist with her body posed exactly the way it was when it first flashed in front of us in episode 1. Joe concludes that the zoologist died due to neurotoxin, and the video footage from MedScan shows just how intimate the process of exchanging those neurotoxins can get. Now, the Alien franchise includes a lot of metaphors and symbolism for sexual predation. It's one of the reasons why the Xenomorphs have such a phallic-shaped head. Xenomorphs themselves are essentially a nightmarish manifestation of sexual assault, forcing their host to carry their offspring as it destroys them from the inside. So the franchise is known to use this grotesque body horror and genital-like imagery to make them seem like a more invasive threat. When Joe tries to explain it to one of the Colonial Marines, they say,
"We're search and rescue. That forensics Agatha Christie this shit."
Which shows how corporate this world has become. They literally don't want to waste time on anything outside of their job, even if it means that there's an imminent threat behind them. Now, of course, the story immediately punishes them for being so dismissive. As they exit the ship and try to find any remaining survivors in the complex building, they reach a stairwell where they're forced to go up or down, and they choose to go down, which could metaphorically seem like a descent into hell, especially since we know the Xenomorph drone is still stalking them. But before we get to see where all of that goes, we're back at the Neverland Ranch, where Boy Cavalier discusses the potential of the hybrids with Dr. Silva. Now, Boy Cavalier is eating an apple while he chats, which is typically seen as a reference to Adam taking a bite from the Tree of Knowledge. It could also be a nod to the iconic Apple logo created by Steve Jobs, another ideological tech billionaire CEO that Boy Cavalier seems to take a lot of inspiration from. He compares the hybrids to the advancement of AI when he says,
What we were doing here
is exploding human potential.
Which is a really interesting way to bring such a relevant topic today into this nightmarish late-stage capitalistic future. In a way, he's positioning the hybrids as an anti-AI and expanding human potential, making them into gods. But once again, we see the theme of human empathy clashing with corporate interests when she challenges him by saying,
Now we have to make the quality of life better. Otherwise, all we've done is make consumers immortal.
and this is where Boy Cavalier starts to differentiate himself from the traditional big bad CEO types that we see.
I'll finally be able to have an interesting conversation.
His quest is not necessarily for more money or power, but for knowledge, to be intellectually challenged, which makes his motivations a bit more complex than we were initially led to believe. As we cut back to Joe and Prodigy's makeshift Marines, we come to a part of the tower where they have to jump the gap, which is when the drone finally makes its presence known. In doing so, he drops a massive Xeno loogie on Jim's shoulder, crawling out from the dark hole above him, which is yet another reference to Samuel the Engineer's death in the original '79 film. So this gives us one of our first shots of the full Xenomorph and full Predator mode, as he chases after Joe, who just barely manages to escape into the elevator, mirroring the much more poorly animated version of a similar chase scene that we see in Alien 3. As he takes shelter, we get a flashback to a day earlier when he was attempting to resign, something that he mentioned in episode 1.
What did the robot say yesterday?
I gotta serve out my contract.
Yet again, we see this conflict between humans and automation as Joe tries to reason with the lifeless corporate drone. And this is when Wendy reaches out to him through the television, completing the line from Ice Age that they seem to have lodged in the back of their memories like it's triple dent gum.
I'll face my fury.
Face your furry what?
Her ability to do this freaks out the people at Prodigy. Even Krish is surprised, implying that normal synthetics don't have those technopathic abilities.
Techno, do you say what now?
Technopathy, it is the ability to manipulate technology, like Danger from X-Men or Brainiac from DC Comics. While we know that synthetics can hook themselves into hardware manually, the fact that she can hack into systems with nothing but her mind seems pretty unique. As we go back to the crash site, we get another view of the city, which seems to have a heavy influence from Blade Runner's aesthetic, as Wendy and the Lost Boys finally arrive at the site. As she steps off the plane, she hears a strange sound. Now we know she has a much broader hearing range than the average human, and she hears the same sound at the end of the episode just before the drone leaps out to attack, implying that these sounds could be some form of seismic communication.
They're talking to each other through earthquakes?
No, not like that. It's a technique used by insects to communicate through vibrations. The Xenomorphs take a lot of inspiration from insects, hence why they have various life stages. And a queen, and it makes sense that they would communicate this way. Then we flip back to Neverland, where that guy is still spraying extra moisture on the wall.
Yeah, you gotta keep it moist.
Now, in the first episode, we overheard Boy Cavalier talking about taking anything he finds from the crashed research vessel, despite the potential lawsuit from Wayland-Yutani. And here, we see him confronted by Yutani herself. Once again, we see this theme of profit over people when she opens with,
"It's been a very expensive day,"
showing how their first concern is her pocketbook. Yutani wants to send her own team to recover the assets from the ship, but Boy responds with,
Any incursion on a Prodigy territory will be construed as a hostile act.
which goes to show just how much control these corporations have over Earth in the 22nd century. They're acting more like countries than corporations, establishing their own borders and retaliating against each other with their own private militaries. As Wendy and the Lost Boys continue to look for Joe in the wreckage, we see them pass by moving billboard ads walking alongside them, showing how the relentless march of consumerism continues on even after the building around it has been destroyed. We also see how the hybrids react in such a unique situation. Even though they don't necessarily have the emotions to process fear, they're still kids, and clearly their synthetic emotions are strong enough to influence them, which is why Chris has to remind them,
Fear is for animals. You are not animals. Now move.
And this is when they discover the flora fauna, which isn't its real name, but it sounds cool enough that we're just going to roll with it until they give us an actual name to call it. As they enter the next room, we see these signs on the wall, which are actually a code for your mom. So this is where they discover the two bodies of the Marines that we saw in the last episode, and that they've been sucked dry by space ticks. They also stumble past the corpse of a face hugger that's been dissected. But of course, the bigger surprise is waiting for them when they find the T-Oculus, which burrows into the eye sockets of its victims and hijacks their body like Starro from DC DC, but with extra body horror. Here we see that it's taken the life of the engineer's cat. After Smee and the crew manage to get a lid on the situation, we turn to Jim, who finally reunites members of their crew. Hawley continues to hit on these anti-capitalist themes when they ask the wealthy socialites to evacuate. Now, of course, they're completely unconcerned with the fact that the building may be coming down around them, and they insist that Boy Cavalier would have let them know personally if they were in any danger. And once again, arrogance is immediately punished as the Xenomorph proceeds to eat the rich, literally. Having these socialites dress up like 17th century royals certainly invokes imagery of the French Revolution and its aftermath, but having the Xenomorph be the cause of it suggests that the demise of the bourgeoisie is an inevitable, natural consequence. Jim gets an up-close and personal encounter with the Xenomorph, only to be rescued when our cyborg friend Marrow comes out to save the day. But of course, his only mission is to secure the specimen, so he knocks Jim out and sprays the Xenomorph down with some kind of webbing. Now, we have seen nets used on Xenomorphs plenty in the AVP series. This new substance seems to be different and works like Spider-Man's web shooters. He's also decked out in Prodigy clothes so that he doesn't stand out as a former crew member of the Mazzio. As Chris starts to investigate the mysterious cargo on board, he hooks himself up into the computer and downloads the information himself. The visuals on screen perfectly match what captures Hawley's retro-futuristic look, blending retro computer screens from the late 70s and 80s and using them for complex modern technology. As our cyborg friend Marrow tries to get away with the cargo, he is ambushed by a bunch of Prodigy officers, and it's no surprise that this turns out real bad for them. However, what is surprising is the fact that the Xenomorph refuses to attack him.
Yeah, what's with that?
Well, there's only one reason we've ever seen a Xeno refuse to attack, which is when they already have a Xenomorph inside of them. We saw Ripley go through this in Alien 3. She was specifically pregnant with the Queen. So this could mean that our boy Morrow is not only in for a big surprise, but that we could see an alien Queen here on Earth. Now, when Jim wakes up, he finds a baseball signed by Reggie Jackson from this famous 1977 series game. Now, this game would have taken place 2 years before the first movie, which is fitting since the series takes place 2 years before Nostromo's famous discovery. And as we've said before, baseball seems to be one of the things that reminds Jim of how everything was before his father died and before he sold his soul to Prodigy. So it makes sense that this would be the place where Wendy finally finds him. Now, despite trying to keep her secret a secret, she immediately blows her cover when she says,
"You talk to Dad?"
rather than saying, "your dad." You know, like how somebody who isn't related to him would say. We also hear Wendy yet again reject the idea of her being synthetic when she says,
"Oh, we don't like that word. We're something different."
And this is when Chris sends them to the front to investigate the eggs that he's found, and she convinces Joe to come along with them, which ends up being a pretty critical mistake for him. Now, along the way, we get shots of the crew that seem like they're from the perspective of the Xenomorph stalking them, with the subjects way off in the distance and usually from a lower vantage point, as if it was watching them while being tucked away behind the corner of a corridor. And this is when Jim starts to put the pieces together, which is when Wendy finally explains to him how she ended up the way she is.
"Joe, when I was sick, the boy genius came to visit me, and he told Daddy that he could help me, but I had to go away. So they took me to live with Kirsch."
Now, he still can't quite process it and continually asks her questions, testing her until he finally believes she's right. We can also see Wendy trying to process these emotions, and Sidney Chandler does an incredible job of portraying them as very real, yet very artificial. They finally arrive at the nest, which is covered with the iconic blue mist that we typically see protecting Xenomorph eggs in the movies.
Yeah, but person, that's just a fog machine with a projector light. That mist isn't blue.
Well, yeah, but that's how they made the mist in the original movie. I mean, they had to find some place to tighten up the budget. Now, despite the fact that it looks artificial, it's actually a natural defense system to protect the eggs. It works like a spider web and alerts them to anybody who is present nearby. It also seems like the eggs can communicate with the Xenomorphs as well, since Wendy begins hearing similar sounds after the blue mist is broken. It's almost as if it's calling the drone to attack these potential threats. Now, the episode ends on another needle drop just like the first one, with this song choice being Stink Fist by Tool. The song is about desensitization, the search for intensity, and how becoming numb to ordinary experiences can lead those to crave something more intense to feel truly alive, which is fitting given that the episode ends with Wendy diving headfirst into the wreckage to save her brother from the Xenomorph. For this entire episode, she has been debating with everybody else on whether or not she's human, and now she's choosing to do the most human thing she can. Now, the use of rock in the score of these episodes also feels like a callback to Alien 3, which included it in many scenes to make the Fiorina 161 seem hyper-masculinized and tough. So guys, that's everything we caught in these first 2 episodes of Alien Earth. How you guys feeling about the show? Are there any details that we missed? You can let us know in the comments or at me on Twitter at Ryan Airy, or go yell at Dodson Sites. He wrote this script and you can find his socials in the description below. And if it's your first time here, welcome to the channel. Please subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.